The night split open with wind and snow as he pushed his horse past the last standing fence, the moon buried behind clouds like a secret too heavy to carry. Jacob Cole rode with his collar pulled high and his jaw set hard. The world narrowed to the sound of hooves biting frozen earth and the ache in his chest that had nothing to do with cold. The town lay miles behind him, and the promise of grain lay farther still, yet he rode as if chased by more than hunger, as if the land itself leaned forward to see whether he would break before dawn. Folks said a man learned who he truly was when the trail turned dark and empty, and Jacob had learned plenty in the years since the drought came and stayed. He had learned how silence could roar louder than gunfire and how hope could be a thin thing that still cut deep. The ranch had nothing left but a half sack of oats and a barn that sighed when the wind pressed against it. Cattle bones marked the low hills like white warnings, and Jacob's hands were cracked from work that no longer fed him. So when word came that grain waited beyond the river, locked up tight in a warehouse run by men who wanted coin he did not have, he saddled up anyway. A man could bargain, a man could beg, a man could promise his labor until spring. Anything was better than watching his stock fall and his land turn to dust. He told himself the ride was simple, there and back before dawn. No time for thoughts of loss or the memory of a woman who once laughed on his porch. Yet the past rode with him like a shadow tied to his boots. Snow started light and turned mean, stinging his eyes and slicking the ground. The horse blew steam and kept steady. A good animal earned through years of honest trade and harder nights. Jacob leaned low and sang under his breath, an old trail tune his father used to hum when the fire burned low. The song kept time with the hooves and kept fear at bay. He thought of the river crossing and the narrow bridge with boards that creaked like old men's knees. He thought of wolves that tracked quiet and men who tracked louder. Still he rode on, because a rancher who stopped moving was a rancher already buried when the candle appeared. It felt like a trick of the storm, a small, steady glow ahead where no house should be. Jacob reined in and blinked snow from his lashes. The light did not waver. It waited, set in a window framed by bare cottonwoods. He had passed this stretch 100 times and never seen a home. Yet there it stood, a low place crouched against the wind, smoke threading from a crooked chimney. The horse snorted and stamped, sensing shelter. Jacob hesitated. A man on a night ride knew better than to trust surprises. But the cold gnawed, and the horse needed rest. And somewhere deeper pull he could not name tugged him forward. He dismounted slow and called out with his hands open. His voice carried thin in the storm. A door opened and warm light spilled across the snow. She stood there with the candle cupped in both palms, flame painting gold on her face, dark hair pinned back with care that spoke of habit rather than vanity. She did not startle. She studied him the way a person studies weather, weighing what it might do next. Widowhood sat on her shoulders like a shawl, heavy yet worn with grace. He could see it in the black ribbon at her throat and the way her eyes held distance and kindness in equal measure. "You're welcome to step in from the wind," she said, her voice steady and low. The candle did not shake. Jacob tipped his hat and gave his name. He did not reach for his gun, and neither did she glance at it. The room smelled of bread and pine. A table stood neat, and a kettle sang soft. She set the candle down and offered water for the horse. He thanked her and led the animal to a lean shed. The kindness felt like a hand on his back, firm and unexpected. Inside she poured coffee and asked where he was headed so late. He told her the truth. Grain and the river and the hope of making it home before daylight. She listened without interrupting. A talent learned by those who have already lost much. They spoke of small things at first, of snow and the way winter came early now, of fences needing mending and roads that vanished under drifts. Then she asked about his ranch, and he answered plain. The drought, the thin calves, the fear that pressed hardest at night. She nodded, as if she knew that fear well. "My husband rode out one night like this," she said, "to bring feed back before a storm. He did not return." The words were simple and carried no edge. Grief had been worn smooth by time. Jacob felt his chest tighten. He did not offer comfort he could not give. Instead he listened. The candle burned low and still, a witness to truths spoken between strangers. When he stood to leave, she wrapped a sack with bread and a strip of bacon. "Take it," she said. For the ride back, he protested once and stopped. He understood pride and knew when to set it down. At the door, she lifted the candle again and held it high, lighting his way to the horse. The storm eased as if pausing to listen. Jacob mounted and looked back. The window glowed, and the woman watched. not with longing but with resolve. "Ride careful," she said, "and come back this way if the night turns against you." He nodded and turned toward the dark, the promise of grain ahead and something else behind him, something warm and waiting. Like a light meant to be found, the river came at him before dawn like a living thing. Black water shouldering ice and muttering threats beneath the bridge. Jacob slowed the horse and let him feel the boards, each plank complaining under weight and weather. The wind pushed sideways and memory pushed harder. The woman with the candle stayed in his thoughts, not as a temptation but as a steadiness, a reminder that kindness still existed out here where the land tested every soul. He crossed with care, counting breaths, then rode on toward the warehouse where lanterns burned sour and men waited with ledgers and narrowed eyes. The bargaining took hours, words traded like blows, promises measured and doubted. Jacob offered labor, repairs, a share of spring calves if spring came at all, and at last a deal was struck thin as the edge of a blade. Enough grain to last the herd through winter if he rode hard and guarded it well. He loaded the sacks, muscles burning, heart hammering with relief and the fear of losing it all on the way back. He turned home as the sky bruised purple and the snow eased to a whisper. The horse moved slower under the weight, and Jacob spoke to him soft, promising rest and oats and a long brushing when they made the barn. Wolves showed themselves at a distance, grey shapes pacing patience, but the sacks rustled and the horse kept steady. Jacob's mind went to the candle again, the way it had not flickered even when the door opened wide to the storm. He wondered how long the widow had lived alone, and how a place could hide itself until needed. Miles passed and the bridge groaned once more under load. The boards slick now. He guided the horse true and crossed, breath held tight. When they reached the far bank he laughed once, sharp and surprised. The sound felt strange after so much quiet trouble found him where the road narrowed between cottonwoods. Two riders cut in close, faces wrapped in hands careless near guns. They wanted the grain, said so plain. Hunger makes men honest in ugly ways. Jacob set his jaw and weighed choices. He could run and risk spilling the sacks, or fight and risk worse. The horse sensed the tension and stamped. Then the widow's words surfaced, "Ride careful." He spoke slow and offered bread from his pocket. He spoke of winter taking all sides and the work waiting come thaw. The men hesitated. One cursed the cold, the other eyed the sacks and the sky. At last they let him pass with threats that tasted hollow. Jacob rode on shaking, grateful for talk that did not draw blood. The storm returned without warning, thick flakes blinding and heavy. The horse stumbled once and Jacob dismounted to lead him. Boots sinking, hands numb, the road vanished. He angled by instinct and memory and the pull of that hidden place. When the light broke through again it felt earned. The candles shone brighter against the dark. The widow stood ready as if she had never left the door. She took in the load and his face and nodded. Inside warmth wrapped them both. She fed the horse oats and rubbed him down. Jacob set the sacks by the wall and sank onto a chair. The kettle sang and she poured. He told her of the bridge and the men and the wolves. She listened and set a hand on the table. "Steady as a promise. You can rest here," she said, "until the storm passes." They shared a meal that tasted like survival, bread broken and bacon split fair. Talk drifted to seasons past and fences lost and the ways grief teaches patience. She spoke of her husband's laugh and how the land still held it if he knew where to listen. Jacob spoke of his father and the old songs and the fear of failing what had been handed down. The candle burned low again and she trimmed the wick. Light held. Outside the wind paced and tired. Inside, something quiet settled, not romance and not regret, but a sense of being seen without being weighed. Sleep came in pieces. Jacob on a narrow bed, boots set by the door, the sacks guarded. He dreamed of cattle fattening and snow melting, of a bridge rebuilt strong. When he woke, the storm had eased to a hush. Dawn thinned the dark. The widow had coffee ready and a map drawn on paper, a safer way home along a ridge. She offered to keep part of the grain dry until he returned with a wagon. He agreed and felt the knot in his chest loosen. Trust grew slow and sure like grass after fire at the door. She lifted the candle one more time. Daylight pale around it. Jacob mounted and took the ridge road she marked. The horse lighter and quicker, the world opening. He looked back once and saw her stand framed by the glow, not waiting this time but watching with purpose, as if the light belonged to her and would burn whether he returned or not. The thought steadied him all the way home. He reached his ranch by noon, fed the herd, and listened to them chew, the sound rich as rain. He stacked what grain he had, and planned the wagon trip. As he worked, the memory of the candle stayed, a promise, shaped like flame. When night came again, he did not fear it the same, because somewhere between the river and the ridge, a light had held against the storm, and he knew where to ride when he needed it. Winter wore itself thin, a day at a time, and Jacob rode the ridge road often, sometimes with the wagon and sometimes alone, hauling the grain that kept his cattle breathing and his land from slipping away. Each trip brought him back to the low house that seemed to reveal itself only to those who needed it. The widow's candle no longer surprised him, yet it never lost its power. She greeted him with the same calm resolve, and together they worked, loading sacks, mending a hinge, clearing snow from the path. Their words stayed honest and unhurried, the kind that grew from shared labor, neighbors in all but name. As weeks passed, the snow softened, creeks whispered again, and the cattle put on flesh. Jacob felt hope settle into his bones, not loud or reckless, but steady as a fence post. Set deep, the widow's name was Eleanor, and saying it aloud felt right, like naming a landmark you'd always known. She spoke more of her past now, of a marriage built on partnership rather than promises, of land broken and made whole again, of the night her husband never returned, and the long years that followed. Jacob listened and answered with his own truths, the failures he carried, and the fear of loving the land more than people. Eleanor laughed once at that, a warm sound that startled them both. She said love was not a thing to divide, it grew where it was given room. The candle burned between them and seemed to agree. Spring storms came heavy and quick, and trouble followed in their wake. The men who had tried to take the grain returned with more hunger than sense. They rode hard and loud. Jacob met them on the ridge. Words failed this time and fists followed. It ended without shots fired, but not without bruises and torn pride. Eleanor tended his knuckles by lamplight, firm and gentle, the candle casting long shadows. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said, and the truth of it struck deeper than any blow. Jacob nodded. The admission felt like laying down a heavy pack when the thaw came. It came all at once. Fields drank deep, and the grass rose eager. Calves bawled and fences bowed. Jacob and Eleanor worked side by side. She knew cattle as well as he did, and better in some ways. She saw what needed doing before it was asked. Neighbors noticed and came to help. Community knitting itself back together after a hard winter. Laughter returned to the land and stayed. The low house felt less hidden now, as if it had been waiting for its time. One evening Jacob brought a lantern of his own, trimmed and bright. He set it on the table beside the candle, not to replace it but to join it. Eleanor smiled and touched the glass. "We'll need more light," she said. "The future stretches wide." They spoke of combining land and labor, of building a bridge stronger than before, of a house with room for storms and visitors alike. Nothing rushed and nothing forced. The plans felt like promises already kept. Summer followed, rich and demanding, and Jacob's ranch thrived. He rode less at night now, but when he did, the road felt friendly. He knew where he was going and why. Eleanor's candle still burned at dusk, a habit and a welcome. Sometimes they sat quiet and watched it together, understanding that not all lights were meant to guide a traveler. Some were meant to mark a home at harvest. They stood on the ridge and looked out over fields that had survived. The river ran tame beneath a new bridge built with help and hope. Jacob took Eleanor's hand and felt the land breathe easy. He thought of the night he rode for grain and found a candle instead. How the smallest light had led him to more than he knew to ask for. When winter came again, it came gentler, and the candle burned brighter. No longer a lone signal against the dark, but part of a house filled with warmth and work and shared nights. Jacob knew then that some rides changed a man, not because of where they took him, but because of what waited when he arrived. And the light, steady and true, would always be there to be found.